Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to address this very important event with you today. And this comes both on my side and the side of the UNSC Climate Change Secretariat. It's really a pleasure to speak with you in the first quarter of 2022. A year in which we build on the momentum coming from the COP26 in Glasgow, and where we can still encourage, and we should continue to encourage nation, business, and civil society to boost climate action. I speak here on behalf of our Executive Secretary, Patricia Spinoza, where she sends her regrets and she cannot be with you today. But I want just to send a very important message since the beginning and stressing the point that us, Executive Secretary, and our process, long-term planning, goals and policies are, yes, welcome, and they are needed. But we hear a lot about 2050 plans, and we are focusing on that date. All of this is very important. But the bottom line is that 2050 will be irrelevant unless we focus on the here and now with respect to international climate action. If we are to have any chance of meeting our goals under the Paris Agreement, we must make the 2020s a decade of climate action. Regardless of whether we are speaking about the public or private sector, we know planning, policy, and jurisdictional processes can be lengthy and arduous. For example, it took 3 decades to get from the first Rio summit to COP26. If we only just got to the implementation stage of the Paris Agreement now, if we continue at this pace, we will not achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement on time. Bottom line, we have 8 years to make progress before the decade ends. 2030 is when scientists tell us we must have made significant progress or risk the worst impacts of climate change to come. That means we need transformational plans by all governments and sectors across all jurisdictions, at the very least in the next couple of years. That's why 2022 is so important and why your work now is crucial. In the next minutes, I will outline the scope of our current challenge, discuss our current progress, and what we need to achieve in 2022 and beyond. I will conclude by addressing the role of technology and engineering in that progress. Climate change is the most significant and rapidly escalating crisis facing humanity. It is killing people today, destroying land, oceans, and biodiversity now. Science shows that every fraction of a degree of temperature rise compounds the collective damage to us all. Some basic figures. 2021 was the 7th hottest year on record. All 7 have occurred in the last decade. We have experienced record-shattering temperatures in different regions. Africa and South America had their warmest September on record. We have seen highest temperature ever recorded in Europe, in Italy, for example, and in the US. There was exceptional rainfall and deadly flooding last year in Asia and Europe. Already we have experienced 3 major storms in Northern Europe with hurricane force winds. The 6th assessment report by the IPCC, the science underpinning the work of the climate change process, reinforced the severity and danger of climate change impacts. The climate emergency is already draining public resources, with estimated losses from natural disaster in 2021 amounting to more than 280 billion globally. This is 70 billion more than 2020 and 114 billion above 2019. So the real cost of climate change are hidden. It's difficult to adequately calculate the associated cost to human health, migration, security, poverty, destruction of biodiversity, access to resources, and numerous other areas. What we do know, however, is that transformational climate action is needed now to avoid those impacts and costs from growing exponentially. It's simple common sense. Our goals are clear. To avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we must achieve 45% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2030, reach net zero emissions by 2050, limit global temperature rise 1.5 degree by 2100. Beyond these three mitigation goals, humanity still needs to deal with greenhouse gas already existing in the atmosphere, gases that are causing the climate impacts we are experiencing now, today. That means adaptation must play an equal role in our efforts as well. Technology and engineering are key to both areas, and I will touch on this. None of what I just mentioned is easy to hear. We cannot sugarcoating reality. We are a species in trouble and we must act accordingly. We still have time to address climate change. We were encouraged by the result coming out of COP26 in Glasgow. We recognize not everyone was satisfied. That's the reality of diplomacy and multilateralism. What parties did achieve was nevertheless impressive and sets the stage for vital work to come in 2022 and beyond. In Glasgow, nearly 200 nations came together and provided clarity on the work we need to undertake to reach the 1.5 degree under the Paris Agreement. For the first time ever, coal was mentioned in the final text. We saw progress with respect to mitigation, adaptation, and finance. Outside the formal processes, important countries have agreed to continue to work together in areas of common interest. We saw parties finalize the guidance for the full implementation of the Paris Agreement. This is a significant accomplishment, allowing parties to scale up their cooperation, mobilize additional finance and private sector engagement, and ensure that the rules are the same for everyone. We also saw completion after several years of negotiation of the enhanced transparency framework. This reinforces trust, which is at the heart of the Paris Agreement and our multilateral process. Parties also decided on the rules to implement carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. But still, despite all these accomplishments, we are still far off the trajectory of stabilizing global temperature rise at 1.5 degrees. That's why COP26 was not the end of anything. It was an important step forward. But our work and the work of party continues towards COP27. So let's look at what is the work ahead. There are several areas of focus and many requiring immediate action. We need nations to provide more ambitious nation climate action plans, known as NDCs, as well as long-term strategies. We simply do not have not enough ambition at the current time. That's why nations, following a resolution COP26, are now asked to come up with stronger plans on an annual basis. No country is exempt. The pressure is on, and civil society has made it clear they want results. It's crucial G20 nations lead by example, as they represent 80% of the world emissions. They must focus on immediate action. Again, the science is clear. We must see more climate action this decade, not plans for 2050, plans that will make 2050 conceivable. On the road to COP27 this year in November in Egypt, we specifically need to see progress in areas of mitigation, adaptation, and finance. With respect to finance and adaptation, in Glasgow, parties agreed that much more support needs to be provided to developing countries. We welcome the call by parties to at least double finance for adaptation, but actual needs are still very much beyond what is currently available. Parties must continue to focus on this as we look ahead to COP27. But there are just a few of the many issues we continue to work with the United Kingdom and Egypt as incoming president of the COP27 as well. So, turning to the role of technology, I have discussed the scope of our challenge, where we stand now in a few areas, so we must focus for 2022. Let's now turn to the role of technology, in particular the role of engineering and architecture in this process. In short, it's crucial. John Kerry, who spoke at the recent Munich Security Conference, had a very good comment during one of the sessions. He said, climate change is not an ideological problem. It is not a political problem. It is a math problem. It is a physics problem. That I suggest makes it a technology and engineering problem. At UN Climate Change, we understand this. We know that technology is key to unlocking climate change, adaptation, mitigation, and finance opportunity. That's why it's one of the central elements in our process. Before I spoke about national climate action plans, the NDC, that nations must submit under the Paris Agreement. They are extremely important as they outline what each country will do to address climate change. Technology, innovation, research and development, and support for technology transfer are often at the heart of those plans, as well as long-term strategy that nations must submit as well. They are at the heart of those plans because both new and existing technology solutions play a number of important roles. Each can identify and introduce opportunities of investment and technical cooperation among countries and with stakeholders. Each can help decision makers develop policy options, providing guidance for the enhancement of national commitments. And understanding the potential of cutting-edge, low-emission technology and their associated economic opportunities can facilitate the process of modeling ambitious longer-term climate mitigation scenarios. These scenarios now show possible pathways to the transition we must make towards net zero greenhouse emissions. Technology isn't simply key to mitigation efforts, it's key to adaptation as well. Currently available technologies help governments set climate resilient national planning and respond to climate challenges as well as risk. The good news is that most national plans and almost all long-term strategies include technology solutions that are being and expected to be implemented in various sectors. There's a long list of solutions identified in those plans, touching on everything from cross-sectoral energy efficiency appliances and processes, utilization of renewable energy technologies as hydropower, solar, wind, and biomass, low or zero emission vehicles, blended fuel, waste-to-energy technology, and climate-smart agriculture. Despite this encouraging and exciting progress, challenges remain. We have established that emission needs to be slashed 45% by 2030. However, a recent report we published shows that under the current NDCs submitted, we are on track to increase emission by 14%. We are moving in the wrong direction, and we must reverse our course. We cannot do so without rapidly increasing the scale and speed and deployment of key technologies. We need the help of everyone in this room to achieve it. So let's turn now to the important role of engineers in this work. In doing so, let's recognize the energy sector where this work is perhaps most evident and beneficial. It is, of course, only one of many examples we can use. The International Renewable Energy Agency tells us that to achieve zero emissions energy supply by mid-century, the energy supply should, by no later than 2030, consist of at least 60% renewable energy share in power generation. A few years ago, this would have been impossible. Yes, is it happening? Solar was prohibitively expensive 30 years ago, and now it's becoming cost-effective thanks to continuous improvements of design and innovation on this front, thanks to engineers. This is only one area. Point to literally any sector, and engineers have been responsible for technological progress and its associated benefits, many directly tied to climate change and sustainability. But in virtually every sector, challenges related to climate change remain, challenges that will require your specific knowledge and expertise. Let's just take a look at a few examples. First, the building and construction sector. Buildings being built today will last until 2050, and they need to be energy efficient and climate resilient. We need your expertise to reduce energy use of existing buildings through better insulation material, windows, and energy efficient equipment for heating, cooling, ventilation, and lighting. We also need that expertise to design and construct new buildings that will require almost zero energy. This means we also need to find effective ways to use renewable energy, such as wind or solar generation in residences and high-rise buildings. Staying with energy, we know that zero carbon electricity requires manufacturing of solar photovoltaic cells, wind power turbines, and smart electricity grid able to manage constantly changing flow of electricity supply and demand. We need your knowledge in the area as well. We also need it with respect to for scaling. For example, we know the scale of installing solar and wind power needs to be tripled or quadrupled over the next 10 years. We cannot do this without engineers. This expertise will have benefits for many parts of the world, some with very specific issues. For example, many communities, particularly in developing countries and remote areas, still have no access to electricity. How can we best develop and harness the technology to help them leapfrog the fossil fuel stage of the past and ensure power supplies can be powered by clean technologies? How can they use the smart grid to store and distribute electrical power from different sources? Transport is another area. We need your skills and knowledge. Manufacturing and maintenance of fuel-efficient vehicles, production electric vehicles, designing and operating intelligent transport systems, all requires engineers. things are clear at this point. First, I have exhausted the word expertise, that's clear. Second, we touch on mitigation, but not adaptation. On adaptation front, one important question is how can we design infrastructure for resilience so that community can withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions and to adapt to changing conditions. I know many of you have made exciting progress on this front. And for example, again, recently engineers start looking at hybrid practices, landscape adaptation practices that combine engineered approaches with nature-based solutions. Hybrid approaches can include the green-gray or blue-gray infrastructure, which integrate ecosystem functioning to help people to adapt. Some examples include living shorelines, constructed wetlands, or salt marsh restoration combined with dikes. We look forward to more from you on that front. Speaking of infrastructure and resilience, engineers can also help nations, villages, and communities by lending their expertise in designing protection against flooding and wind destruction in vulnerable places. Here we are mainly talking about low-lying areas. They can also provide advice whether or not to build in possible vulnerable areas following climate disasters. Mitigation, adaptation, the need for engineering expertise in virtually every sector. I know I've touched a lot and requested a lot. So let's quickly turn to final thoughts on some suggestions from us on how we feel engineers can play a role towards building a sustainable and climate resilient future. And now we, UN Climate Change, is involved in that. Just a few thoughts, of course. Well, first of all, innovate. I recognize this is easier said than done. Governments must provide the enabling environment necessary for innovation to occur. We are working through our processes at the international level and within UN Climate Change to facilitate that work. We also know financing plays a key role, and we are working in that area as well. The executive secretary was recently in Munich and had several discussions with some of the biggest investors on the global stage. Innovation came up several times, and it's critical. Second, we need to consider equity and social acceptability of technologies and innovation. In particular, unintended consequences that may promote inequality. What works in the developed world does not always work in the developing, and vice versa. We must understand these considerations. Third, we must continue to share knowledge and information, whether it's through your own networks, summits like this one, or through the UN climate change process or otherwise. Every major age in human history has been driven by open societies, openly sharing information. And at the international level, parties and private sector can encourage this work by supporting the multilateral process. UN climate change has adopted a policy of inclusive multilateralism, ensuring all voices are heard in the climate change discussion. And finally, we must, throughout our nation and society everywhere, invest in higher education and educate young engineers, especially women, who will continue to build on your work, continue to refine and to innovate, and continue to create for the future. I really want to thank you for the opportunity and your time today. And please remember that while we must continue to have a vision for the future and long-term goals, that our point today is that our work must start now to make the transition we need to make to avoid the worst impact of climate change. We are really rapidly out of time. So on behalf of the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat, I thank you for your time today, and we look forward to working with you to build a safe, healthy, sustainable, and climate resilient future. Thank you very much.